Hi guys, this is Babs with his AI journey so far. Today, I will be picking up the conversation from what I got into next after exploring the automations. Um, so the year was 2025, and I had leveraged January for the course that I took. February and March were mostly trying out tools and experimenting with automations. Midjourney was one of the first tools that I decided to pay for outside of ChatGPT, and that was because I was trying to also get better at prompting to generate images. And for the longest time, Midjourney, if I'm correct, you could correct me in the comments, was this Discord server that you needed to be granted permission to get into. And I just never proceeded the moment I saw that that was what the process was. So I find out you could pay for Midjourney. So a lot of about 2 full weeks of everyday prompting and just trying to read other people's prompts and how they got like some of the best images was definitely something that I paid attention to. And just beginning to get familiar with terminologies outside of what I had learned. I had learned a lot of the foundational stuff, what LLMs were, how they worked, how embeddings and vector databases worked, a lot of the technical stuff that, as an end user, I would not really have known if I didn't decide to go down that rabbit hole. And for me, that was what the whole of 2025 was dedicated to. I started getting familiar. There was a lot of technicalities, and it was also a bit of, do I need to learn these things down to the technicalities, down to understanding math, or do I just need to understand why things work the way they do and not get lost in the how? Because the how might require, and this is me being silly, an entire computer science degree. However, understanding the why helps me personally a lot more. So I started to understand how things worked and what exactly LLMs were and why they operated the way that they did. And that informed the level of trust I gave these tools versus, oh, these things are really great. I can ask them anything. And over time, you start to understand that don't rely on them as a source of truth because they're generative in nature. And what that literally means is they're just prediction engines that do a lot of heavy computation in the speed of light. So they're computing the probability and the best pathways for things really quickly. And that's what they're really great at. And also, early last year, I don't believe that the internet had been integrated into ChatGPT results. And I might be wrong on this, but early on in ChatGPT days, it was just the model, the large language model that was just giving you responses based on the trained data. And that's why there was a time where you would ask ChatGPT questions and it will give you the disclaimer that it doesn't have the answer to that question because the data it's been trained on stops at, let's say, September of 2023. So that was one of the things where you're like, I really should be careful with this thing. And so I learned stuff and I realized, okay, I've been asking ChatGPT a lot of questions. When you're clueless about it, you're asking a lot more personal questions and you start to learn about privacy. And for me, that was a bit of a turning point where ChatGPT does what a web-based product is supposed to do, which is make you feel comfortable, ease of use, and you just keep getting hooked to it. But the more I learned, the more I realized that this is about to become the next thing that we want to experience with all our data just being farmed. And now the engine was a lot more accessible to us. And I think that was one of the greatest effects of ChatGPT's watershed moment. The machine, the algorithm had been democratized, so we also could get a hold of it. And I say this to people because AI is not new, or machine learning is not new. When we will talk about the algorithm, the Instagram Explore, the feed, and how it knows what you like, these companies have had these technologies, at least machine learning models, for a while. It's why the TikTok algorithm is so great, or whatever other product that you use. So these models have been using reinforcement learning, amongst other things, to get us hooked on their products. That's literally what I would call it. So with ChatGPT, the door was open to everybody. So now you get a hand of this model, but then with closed-based models, the way you can do it is build your own thing, but then you're still using ChatGPT's API. And that means you're paying them for the service. However, the secondary effects of ChatGPT was, as with a lot of technological advancements, the open source community, companies that had resources also released large language models that were open source, which only just means you can download the model and you can own it. So it can live locally on a machine that you run, so long you have large enough compute, or your machine has the specifications to be able to run such a model. And that was the key part. And sometime in March was when I realized, okay, I've been using ChatGPT for 2 years. I think it's time to spin up my own AI server, like set up an AI lab of my own, so that I do have a private instance of machine learning. And that was like what I dedicated the end of March. So Q2 is what I'll call it, of last year, where I researched specs. I called a number of people that were really into hardware, and I ordered the parts. It was a mix of Amazon and eBay. Just at the time, I think I got two NVIDIA RTX 4080s. And I mean, over time, you look back and you learn, and you're like, maybe I should have done the 1390. But it's sometimes you go head first and you learn. And for me, I ordered the parts, a Threadripper, the different things that made it up. I think at the time I had ordered 64 gig of memory. So with the 4080s, I ordered two. Each has a VRAM, which, if you're a gamer, you already understand what I'm talking about, of 16 gig. So I had 32 total. And then I'd never, beginning to end, assembled a computer before. However, this was me doing it. And it was fun and funny because the curiosity just pushed everything. And also, we live in a time where there's almost nothing you're looking for that a YouTube video or an internet link is not going to provide you. So it's why you almost can embark on things that you've never done before. So with a couple YouTube videos, I assembled the PC, spun it up, fired it up, and did things I had never done before. So set up a hypervisor and then spun up my AI instance as a VM virtual machine. And that literally was the doorway to something that I had never, ever imagined. And I thought about it being in crypto since 2015. I didn't have that same level of curiosity, because if I did from the jump, I probably would have mined Bitcoins, and I probably would have maybe spun up a company, tried something. And for me, while I just had a good run in crypto with respect to returns by just investing and holding and whatever the case is, I decided that in this new rabbit hole that I had embarked on, I wanted to be a lot more intentional. And that's kind of why, outside of just automations, I'm like, let me spin up this machine. And that was the greatest thing personally to me that I accomplished last year. It was spinning up this server, downloading open source local models that I could tell anything and my data wasn't going to anywhere. And what that did in the ripple effect was I had to come up with like my personal framework for what I use ChatGPT for versus what I'm using local models for. So it was almost like I had to come up with like my personal governance and compliance framework, knowing that I don't want to talk about personal things with models that in no time they're going to start to advertise to you. And you don't know that your prompts are not going to inform the targeted ads that you're going to get. So for me, I started to think about it and I joke about it now because about a week ago, or maybe a little over a week ago, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, just announced that they were about to start trying out ads on ChatGPT. So I wasn't wrong. So for me, I at least try to come up with guardrails. And the guardrails sometimes are never perfect, which means you might falter, but at least when you falter, you know to pull yourself back and be like, okay, I think I just asked this thing something about my health. Let me stop. Let me maybe just make a plain old Google search or just use a local model, hoping that the local model's training data has a response for what I am trying to find out. And for me, that was the doorway because I just started to soar with ideas and ideas like, okay, maybe I should try to build my own personal voice assistant. And this was somebody who just had product knowledge from AI. And then I joined subreddits like local LLM, and those guys are brutal because you're coming with this thing of learning via using ChatGPT. And these are people who write code, who sometimes feel disrespected with folks who just use AI to code. And it was brutal, but sometimes when you know what it is you're looking for, those things don't get to you. And you just know that I'm goal oriented. And there's always one or two people that respond to your comments and be like, oh, don't feel bad that I also just started X number of months ago. And it was quite encouraging with folks who helped. So even down from learning different things like quantization and all that. And then one of the best things that happened was I stumbled on this website called, I think it was APXML. And it was me just trying to calculate VRAM needs and the types of models that VRAMs could handle. So if you had 16 gig VRAM, what's the number of parameters that that GPU can handle? And I realized how much training courses they had on their site. And that's when I got a little bit technical and started to at least try to be familiar with some of the technical terms I read. Some of the things made sense, and the others were a bit too much. So, one of the things that I did that helped at least make me become a bit more familiar was I literally copied the training into a Word document. So this was tasking because it's multiple pages. But I copied everything into a Word document. This is probably not the best thing to confess to, but it wasn't to do anything. It was to migrate it to Notebook LM. And by migrating it to Notebook LM, for anybody who is familiar with Notebook LM, the goal was Notebook LM is genius enough to digest AI or text-based topics into podcast type material. And I just would listen to them and it made a lot more sense just the way they would come up with the analogies or scenarios that would make you fully understand, okay, what is GPU, what is VRAM, what is a KV cache, and how do all these things come together, how the different computational FLOPs, and it was very, very great. And for me, that was the most integral thing because I owned my own resources. And at that point, it was now left to my imagination. My only limit was what I could think. Having the tool be a solution oriented thing, which is if I think of an idea, I could go back and forth with ChatGPT, flesh it out, and then start work. for me was very important. And this is something that most people more than likely will not embark on. Spinning up a server is capital intensive. It's technically demanding. So I understand that many people probably won't, but if you can, if it's somewhere in your wheelhouse, it's something you should consider. There is this movement on Twitter or X called Buy a GPU, where we're only going to once again be consumers of the open AIs and everything. So sometimes your ability to at least own a piece of your own infrastructure, even if you're still using it. Like I said, I have personal guardrails as to when to use public versus when to keep things private. In the future, we don't know, but it's just something that didn't hurt and I felt was very important to do. Um, I'll park it here today, and I do hope maybe this inspires somebody who's been considering buying a GPU. I would like to see folks in the comments with questions, insights, maybe things they think I should try, which I'll get into in the next video, some of the things I tried. However, I would say go to www.mindmeetsmodel.com and .ai as well, and you'd see that I have a sandbox, which is some of the things that I experimented on last year. And I also have a blog where I I wrote some of the things that crossed my mind, as well as just imaginations for things. However, feel free to subscribe to the newsletter, and also feel free to like, share, and subscribe this video. Subscribe to this channel, like, share the video, and please subscribe to the channel if you feel it's valuable to you. I look forward to the next video where I will start to share some of the things that I embarked on individually with my local model with you guys.